I
but
did.
But I didn't know when that would be.
No, you do.
Well, I guess you've read enough from that, so I don't have to. So I'm going to read predominantly from two works in progress, a novel and a poetry collection. My third novel is called Don Quixote. I'll let you argue with me about that later. I'm going to jump all over the place, but at least I'm going to jump in one direction. Book 1, Part 1. 1. I would tell you his name, but what would it matter? Don Quixote tilts toward the gutted building, tilts his head the windmill of his joints and kinks. The red brick tavern with floors of rooms for rent, the building bare bone, empty these years since a tavern. Don Quixote is another man, a younger man, a pint in his hand in Lockmaster Tavern, watching his afternoons away in what he had listened to. The Celtic rock of Jimmy George, the early years of Furnace Face. Don Quixote, or the man he was, a years ago game of pool and tilting at corners in the angled green of sorcery and math, the unbelievable deep, the unenviable deep, but that was past. Don Quixote tilts outside the building bare and empty in a shell of its former, slightly caved. Tilts and he tilts. A heritage nearly torn and even as the intervening courts, as the courts intervene, as the court's court intervening, Quixote pauses. Don Quixote writes his name out on a scrap of paper and folds it into his mouth, consumes it. Don Quixote writes his name out on a scrap of paper, his old name, previous, become foreign, a name now separate from his body, removed, as it were. Don Quixote writes his name out on a scrap of paper and lets it fall from his open fingers, drop from where he stands in the sidewalk to the pavement. He lets it fall like letting go. He has released his former name, his foreign name. He has released it and thus given it permission for new life. He has allowed it finally to live. Don Quixote is birthed there, out on a sidewalk, a difficult labor. Mess of water and blood. Wipes a drop from his nose, smeared across his right hand. Don Quixote thinks of Hercules, the dozen tasks set down like hurdles, crosses to bear. Quixote has only to be born, pushing into existence on an Ottawa street, but this is difficult enough. What happened in that moment before the first moment? Schrodinger's cat. The animal left in an enclosed space, neither alive nor dead. Both possibilities existing at once. A pine box, a dead cat. A singular point, a scratch on his face. Don Quixote, the point at which everything begins, at which everything emerges. 5. Very few foreigners know where they are. Don Quixote, a stranger in his own country, tilting constantly as the landscape tilts back, meeting hard at the apex, struck hard at the middle, the midsection. Quixote lay down on the bloody ground, draining the life and the mind right out of him. How did he get here, he wonders. Perhaps this is where he has always been, lying bare on the ground, unable to move. The only certainty he still lives from the enormity of pain through his old, twisted body. How did he get here, and why can't he move? Don Quixote, an accumulation. With the slightest turn, potentially as lost as Orpheus or Lot's wife, lost even to her own naming, lost to her history. Salt is a funny business, Don Quixote thinks. It tastes like nothing else. It tastes like itself. Her hand on his hand, her hand on his arm. Keep heaven on hold, the sign says, advertising yogurt, a bacteria cured in a vat. Her almond hands. Is this heaven made up as a finest concoction of toxins? He begins to lose vision, slips lightheaded, only such, and shudders. feels his body lose balance and lance. He's no longer a headlight in the dark. There is a darkness. Don Quixote finds a dark place in himself, crawls in and remains. Isn't that the song from Midnight Cowboy? He always liked that song, even from when he was young. Does he remember being young? There's a pit and Don Quixote is in it. There's no bottom, it gets only deeper. If joy is infinite, then too its shadow engulfed his whole body and made him strong in it, this fallen place. He can already feel the dam of his skin falling away, desert and stripping him dry. His body like a sand dune in sun, he already feels his skin begin to grain and sweep. A hand at his elbow directs him. A hand at his side turns, directs him, turned back to where he emerged from, turning back home. Seven. One morning he climbed into his armor, Quixote, climbed into his armor and set out his path, a ribbon around the hem of his fair lady's dress, a hem. Sancho out in the field, standing, outstanding, toiling, delivered and conscripted into personal service by this errant field knight, anointing the field rank of squire, under promise of further reward, the future of islands and his own to look over, Quixote's own. The lost knight returned to his horse and his bull helmet. Quixote works to rebuild his forces, the first eyes he set upon. There are books in his house, there, behind him, an adventure ahead. There is a scar at his temple, the shape of a crescent, a moon, whether waning or refilling full is unclear. What is this, what he calls Sancho? Sancho, the one who leaves wife and daughter at home to follow along in his adventuring, the sidekick, the comic relief. He has no burro to ride behind Quixote, horseless himself. We call this a serious loss of equipment. (16) A fire in his belly, Don Quixote in his basement suite, his suite positioned against a strain of his own self, positioned against a strain of her hands and his mouth dry down the length of her spine. Is this Dulcinea? She's not Dulcinea, but she is more than a distraction, but almost enough to make him forget. I forget, she says out loud, have forgotten, isn't it? Put the mouth on the rum and the rum around him, and the rum was the skin and the sliver between her soft mouth and his, her fingers on him working hard and then working, pushing deep into her again and again. He tilted, pushing open what was ever asleep. Heart knows what it knows, heart wants what it wants, Don Quixote knows what it wants. When will these journeys end? But there is something missing, something else. Sorry, I just lost myself. Oh, there I am. Like a deck of game cards and a missing queen. How does one play incomplete? Burnt almond her skin and a taste of it almond, salt soft, the taste of her skin in her mouth even before all the rum. She runs down his sheets. Is this love? Is this something like? Stop talking, she says. He didn't realize he was. At the end, she breathes hard and deep and quick after the shudder of catch, release, Don Quixote knows. But a ways before dawn, she kisses him as deep as the ocean floor and dresses back to her own bed and the man that then waits for her. Even his lovers have lovers. Don Quixote looks for a way out, but he can't. It is never the same as the way he came in. One thing about a work in progress, you're editing even as you're working on the damn thing. Reading it out loud, I mean. I'll read just a couple more. Pardon?
Can we echo you?
No, since you asked.
I asked.
Thank you, David. I'll read just a couple more from this. I'm doing a fine job, David. Leave me alone. Part 2. 1. A man leaves his house for his morning routine, leaves his house again, a second, a fourth, or 100th time. Clean tie and shirt freshly pressed and his briefcase in hand, leaves, crosses a threshold. To the windmill's answer, he tilts on his axis. Literature begins and ends, it seems, with myth. Quixote of the Spanish lands, of the vast geographies of field, of prosaic places he could barely recall. The large plain of Iberian Peninsula, La Mancha, from the Arabic al-Mancha, meaning land dry. Quixote rides out across bone he can taste on his tongue, meals of bread and sweet manchego cheese. A quest is a quest, a request. The Holy Grail and the soul of Galahad, only found by he who was pure of thought and deed, he who wasn't even looking. At the beginning of the story, there's already the end. Don Quixote, who fell into his bed and died in his house in his village, 1614. How much longer did Cervantes himself last? In the end, one but a creation of the other. Did the author Cervantes only create Quixote, or were they each other's creators? These gods built from the imaginations of man. The lean, sullen night. Once a man is dead, can he still be considered? Would his delusions continue? Would they still have their hold? 10 years between books, Dulcinea has had a lot of living come by, and yet the story is expected to pause, even without her knowledge or consent. Hardly a breach of contract, considering none was ever drawn. You have to move to turn the lights back on? All right. Jesus. A decade since Quixote has given her pause, let alone a single thought on any subject, as though turning a page. Time passes, but the past is as thin as a sheet. You can even see through it. In this way, our night is transparent. But this is the wrong end of storytelling, passed through a series of filters, translations, and faux authors. The faux Quixote and his faux Sancho passing into eternity, passing by, the ghost night echoing long after the original has passed. Now I'm going to read some poems about a lake. Lake nowhere. Skyline pure sky, the water, lakes a nervous lap. My shining errant night in glitter, lip gloss. Between envy and the moon, financial districts, CN Tower blooms. In light show nocturnes, you woke, discovered stomach cramps and this. Basaltic rock you mention, standing, the circle stain. Quick glances down one side. 300 passing ships, sails like silver, flags. A threadbare ease, a base of trees at Merlot's end. No one is an island. You are. Relief of schooners, slips, come out of freshwater narrows. To come, a taste of things. A tempest in a teapot, season's pool at shallow. Late August, trees hint autumn, leaves along. Your mouth carves circles out patio glass, caress of bite marks, hollow. Beneath the railing, west swoon of shadows, lower limbs. Sunbathers stretch, certain only of themselves. Lake repetition. A feather stinks. Of abstract sentiment, the seagull leaves white trace. In ways of sunrise, spoken, out, the boat's one arm. Or groundless slide, a sullen drink continues. Smoke rises from the sun, and every night. An endless lake, a sequence, counting 5. What might be great, we only have the lake to tell. Book of either way. Across from oak, the shed, a sympathetic hollow. Confess, I try to speak to backwoods, what otherwise they left. The slipper, service, a scarred horizon. What current scrawled through alternate means. If my mood is wrong, it matters. Words that tether across a cooler reason. The great distraction, seen, your company. Slips and slips, dark water. We float in dim light. A seaplane, birds, a light touch, hands. A journal front, if we ever looked, impassioned by the difference. Bye, Murray. People leaving is a bad sign, Rod.
No.
Okay. I will believe you. Lake Sirius. A ship to shore constructed out a tin man, last seen reading. An elementary curve. As you would have it, sleep a starry tide, 4 limbs and breath. Who lives or lives an island, candle wash, of moving and non-moving parts. Of paradise, shape is just a window, passing, oath of watching form. Of husbands, wives, an anchor tourniquet, suckled, in a wakeful state, the glassy sand. I'm walking down your hall, arm of this borrowed shirt. The sky invented ours red and orange pink, and smoky black, this husky voice. I'll do 2 more. Little essays on love and virtue, where joy in turn connects, flipped to its side a brutal path, the entire length of cluster, tears, unstated but by no means, what Homer tells the Iliad, once more the ripened thorn, a sliver down her spine, a health-related service. Where in this wicked world you are, it can be spoken. Few things are free, metro workers, a feast at funeral since the names of these departed, or drinks an instant, coffee. The car spate by a north of autumn route, so children say, is tested, mirror held to fact. White laughter, blue, what can be spared. Remember, remember that stretch of seasons, breeze. Needles this, a conversation made out, commercials. A boy talks to another boy, a girl, what British sense. Concludes a citizen, essential. Remind me of grammar, says, meaning English. The floor not broke, scarred for sure. When Harter stops, a poetry. The long-necked reeds, her lips a flavor made of sweet. A trance or sleepy song. We made out the differences, our ends at meet, passing for breath and simple water. I smoothed the path of water, weeds, a fully ruined form. We bridge, we talk, the substance holds. A swimming pool of customs sharp, expressly made. Passport and keep company, a phantom tongue of blue. Made for what it wants, for what withstands. It holds, a passage bent of chain. Historians catch the eye in love with love and love. The incarnations all, a science knot of Abel's. Piece of the action, fractals, think thick in circles, fold, body, love, a bridge, and broken in a letter, a chamber of forgive, in marble, part, beyond a circle smoothed, exposed. And I'll read quickly, if I can, one more. That shrug is a yes.
And see, the people came back.
Hmm?
The people came back.
I'm going to read quickly from one piece from Wild Horses, partly because Andy actually edited this book, and I thought, whether he wants it or not, I'm going to read from it. Map of Edmonton, Saskatchewan Drive, for Andy Weaver. 1. A river that would snake a road as simple as it could. Who else would down upon a balcony? Don't let the poem end or deep to burn. 2. He asks the crow instead, the magpie lyric and staccato hum. 3. How green the cut of valley deep would enter us and them when you were here and here, the worst of sake goes suffering into an oily flame. 4. This is spun out a curve on the last turn of rock, on the line, on the breath, held down there by some. Is this a tension or length that compels out the river, out the endless drive?